Forget what you think you know about this story. If you love MAGA, if you hate MAGA, or if you're just bone tired of seeing those four letters every time you open your phone, this is about you. Because before we talk about politics, we have to talk about something far more personal. What it feels like to wake up in a country that doesn't look like the one you were promised. You know the images by now. Red hats stacked on folding tables, crowds chanting in unison, flags so big they swallow entire stages, memes flying across your feed at 3 a.m., a breaking news alert about another indictment, a fundraising email in your inbox an hour later, promising that if you chip in $10 right now, you're not just donating, you're standing with history. You see all that and your gut reacts long before your brain catches up. Do you see hope? Do you see a scam? Do you see both, tangled up so tightly you're almost afraid to pull them apart? Be honest with yourself for just a moment. When you hear MAGA, what flashes through your mind first? A movement of people, or a machine selling something? That's the question we're going to sit with whether you like it or not. Is this a historic popular uprising, or the most successful political marketing campaign of the 21st century? Somewhere in Ohio, there's a man who will tell you, without blinking, MAGA saved my life. He'll talk about losing his job when the factory closed, watching his town hollow out, feeling like every politician on TV was speaking a language meant for other people. The first time he heard that voice on the screen say, "Forgotten men and women," he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Seen. He bought a hat. He went to a rally. He cried, quietly, in a crowd of strangers. Somewhere else, maybe in Arizona, there's a woman who will tell you, just as clearly, "I realized I was a customer." She'll talk about the emails that never stopped, the constant crises that always needed money, the way every outrage turned into a t-shirt, a slogan, a limited edition mug. She'll tell you about the moment she looked at her bank statement after another urgent donation and thought, wait, who is actually winning here? Two people, same movement, completely different verdicts. Which one is right? Before you answer, you need to see something most of us never do. How eerily familiar this all looks when you zoom out and look at history, not headlines. Because the tactics that built MAGA were tested long before the first red hat rolled out of a factory. The emotional levers, the golden age promises, the us versus them stories, the way identity gets wrapped around a slogan. None of that is new. What's new is that this time, those old tricks collided with social media, 24-hour outrage cycles, and a political class that learned to think like advertisers. So here's the deal I'll offer you right now, before we go any further. If you want more slow, uncomfortable breakdowns like this, where we dissect power, propaganda, and history without treating you like an idiot, hit subscribe to Golden History USA and tap the bell. Not as a favor to me, but as a signal to the algorithm that you're not just here for 10-second dopamine hits. Now, let's wind the clock back to where MAGA actually started, not as a threat or a promise, but as 4 words on a red hat. Picture the country a decade ago, before the chants, before the indictments, before the word MAGA became a personality test. On one side, you have booming coastal cities, tech companies minting overnight millionaires, influencers selling dreams through ring lights. On the other, there are towns where the main street is half pawn shops and half empty, where the factory that once anchored everything is now a rusting skeleton with weeds growing through broken windows. People in those towns turn on the TV and see debates about things that feel abstract, distant, almost alien. The economy is recovering, they're told, but their wages haven't. The culture is progressing, they're told, but they feel mocked, talked down to, left behind. You don't have to agree with their perception. You just have to acknowledge it's real to them. Into that atmosphere walks a slogan. Not a white paper, not a 37-point policy agenda, not a carefully footnoted plan. 4 words. Make America great again. You've seen them so many times that your brain has probably filed them under background noise, but slow down for a second And look at the engineering. Make. That's not a description. It's a command. It asks you to do something, not just feel something. It tells you that you're not a spectator. You're meant to be a participant. America. The biggest, broadest tribe word there is. It skips past arguments about parties, races, professions. Whoever you are, if you see yourself inside that word, the slogan is talking to you. Great. Totally vague, incredibly powerful. Great how? Great like when? It doesn't say. That's the trick. You get to pour your own memories, your own fantasies, your own hurts into that empty space. Again, the quiet knife at the end. It implies that greatness is gone, that someone took it, that something precious has been stolen and needs to be reclaimed. Action, tribe, emotion, loss.
4 words that, in 30 syllables, say, "You were robbed. You deserve better. Come join the people who are finally going to fix it."
Ask yourself honestly, when those words first hit, did people flock to rallies because they had carefully compared tax plans and foreign policy positions, or because the slogan finally gave them a way to name their anger? For a lot of people, those words landed in places no politician had bothered to reach in years. A single mom juggling 2 jobs, watching rent climb faster than her paycheck. A laid-off steelworker who used to come home dirty and proud, now filling out online forms for jobs that pay half as much. A veteran who came back to a town that barely remembered him, and a government that treated him like a number. Make America Great Again told them 3 things at once. You are not crazy. You are not alone. You are part of something bigger than your own struggle. That's not nothing. In a world where most political language sounds like it was written by lawyers for other lawyers, 4 simple words cutting straight to the gut can feel like a revelation. At first it looks harmless, even corny. A hat, a bumper sticker, a chant at a rally. You put it on because you're curious, or angry, or hopeful, or just tired of being told you're the problem. But something strange happens when you wear a slogan enough times. It stops being just cloth and ink. It starts being a costume. Think about the first time someone glared at you or smiled at you because of that hat. The first time a cashier made a face. The first time a stranger in a parking lot came up to you and said, "Hey, me too," and you high-fived like you'd known each other for years. Little by little, "I like this politician" shifts into, "I am this thing." That's the moment when it stops being a campaign and starts being an identity. People don't say, "I'm voting Republican this year," or "I'm on the right." They say with their chest out or their jaw clenched, "I'm MAGA." Same way their parents might have said, "Reagan Democrat." Same way some people once said, "Tea Party." But this time, the hat, the chants, the social media ecosystem around it makes it feel more total. Let's go back to the man in Ohio. The day he first slipped that hat on, it wasn't about owning anyone online or signaling virtue. It was about not feeling invisible. He'd watched his father lose his pension. He'd watched his son move away because there was no work nearby. He'd listened to president after president talk about the middle class, as if it were a statistic in a graph, not the life collapsing around him. Then one night, sitting in his worn-out armchair, he heard a voice on the TV say, "I love the poorly educated." And for the first time, instead of feeling mocked by that phrase, he felt defended. At the rally, surrounded by thousands of people who looked like they could live on his street, he wasn't just a laid-off factory worker anymore. He was part of the forgotten men and women of America, finally being remembered. You can hate the man on the stage. You can distrust the policies. But if you can't understand the emotional hit of that moment, you will never understand why the slogan stuck. Ask yourself, did people join this because they discovered a 10-point healthcare plan they adored? Or because those 4 words made them feel like their suffering had a name, a story, and a side? And if that sounds new to you, it shouldn't. History has seen this movie before. Different countries, different flags, different languages. Over and over again, in times of economic stress and cultural whiplash, someone stands up and promises to take a wounded nation back to an undefined, better time. Sometimes they're sincere, sometimes they're cynical. Usually, it's a messy mix of both. But the pattern is always the same: a vague golden age behind us, a corrupt them to blame. A simple slogan in front of us that says, "Come home. We will make it right." The only real difference now is that this time, the slogan didn't just live on posters and radio jingles. It moved from hats to hearts, and then into the bloodstream of an entire online ecosystem that knows exactly how to turn identity into engagement, and engagement into fuel. And that's where this stops being just a story about one campaign and starts becoming a story about the kind of machines our age builds around every strong feeling we have. MAGA is not the first time a country was told its best days were behind it, and that only one movement could drag it back. If that line makes you bristle, good. Sit with it for a second. Because long before there were red hats and Twitter wars, people stood in packed halls listening to voices that promised to restore what had been lost. The names change. The flags change. The villains change. The story barely does. Go back almost a century. A different America, cracked by the Great Depression. Banks collapsing, farms dusted out, families lining up for bread. Into that anxiety walked men with microphones and radio towers, telling listeners that shadowy elites had stolen their country and that only a new movement, a movement of the people, could take it back. The details were different. The enemies were different. The slogans were different. But the emotional script, pain, blame, promise. You've seen versions of it across history books, across continents. We used to be strong. They made us weak. Follow me, and we will return to greatness. Does that automatically make MAGA the same as any of those older movements? No, that's lazy thinking. What it does mean is that the wiring MAGA plugged into was already there, in the culture, in the human nervous system. Us versus them. The real people versus the corrupt elite. Back to a golden age we half remember, half imagine. You don't need to be American to recognize it. Countries everywhere have their own version of again. Make Britain great again. Take back control. Make the nation pure again. Return to true values. Different languages, same ache. If you strip away the specific policies, the chants, the scandals, what you're left with is a formula that has been working in one version or another for centuries. Step 1. Convince people their suffering is not random. It was done to them. Step 2. Convince them that existing institutions are either powerless or complicit. Step 3. Offer a simple, emotionally satisfying story about how to reverse the damage. Step 4. Wrap that story in symbols they can wear, repeat, and recognize on sight. If you think this is about one man, you're wrong. This is about that formula. Because once a story like that takes root, it doesn't really belong to its original author anymore. It belongs to everyone who needs it. A laid-off worker trying to make sense of humiliation, a small business owner crushed under bureaucracy, a young activist sick of being told to wait, moderate, compromise. They all hear, "Make America great again," and each inserts their own villain, their own wound, their own lost golden age. Some people hear the 1950s. Some people hear the 1980s. Some people hear a time that never actually existed except in family stories and movie scenes. That doesn't make them stupid. It makes them human. We are wired to reach back for a time that felt simpler, safer, cleaner, even if that memory is half nostalgia, half invention. The difference this time is not that one political figure was more charismatic or more outrageous or more authentic than his predecessors. The difference is what that old, familiar formula collided with. Past movements had leaflets, newspapers, rallies, maybe radio and television if they were lucky. This one has something else. A machine that lives in your pocket, tracks your attention, studies your fears, and feeds you an endless stream of content tuned to keep you watching. The attention economy. In that environment, a movement like MAGA is not just a story competing with other stories. It's a product competing with other products. Every slogan competes with every other slogan. Every clip competes with every other clip. Every outrage competes with every other outrage. If your message doesn't hit fast, hard, and emotionally, it drowns. Now ask yourself, in that arena, what kind of politics survives? Subtle, nuanced, complicated appeals that make room for doubt? Or bold, simple, emotionally charged narratives that can fit on a hat, a meme, a chant? When you plug a centuries-old populist formula into a 21st century attention machine, something shifts. Things stop being just a movement and start behaving like a brand. The hat isn't an accessory. It's a logo. Think about it. There are plenty of political slogans out there. You might remember them vaguely, half a sentence here, a phrase there. But the red cap is different. Even from a distance, even with the words blurred, you know exactly what it stands for. You know what reaction it's meant to provoke. You know which side of the line it's drawing. Red is not subtle. It shouts from across a crowd. It pops in photos. It looks militant and celebratory at the same time. The font is basic, almost boring. No fancy flourishes, no designer cleverness. That's not an accident either. It means anyone can knock it off, embroider it, paint it by hand, and it still counts. The easier it is to replicate, the faster it spreads. The price point is low enough that almost anyone can buy in. Not a luxury good, not a gated item. A token of belonging that says, I'm part of this, for the cost of a takeaway meal. You didn't need a membership card. You didn't need a secret list. You didn't even need to know much about policy. You just needed to put the logo on your head and walk outside. Has any other recent political slogan done that? Ask yourself, genuinely, when you see that red hat now, do you think someone who prefers X tax policy or member of that tribe? Because once you see it as a jersey, everything else starts to make sense. Hats, flags, bumper stickers, t-shirts, yard signs, phone cases, even the way people say the word MAGA with a certain rhythm, a certain pride, or a certain sneer, depending on which side they're on, these are not random. They are identity markers. Just like sports teams, music fandoms, lifestyle brands, the movement created visual and verbal cues that said, we are us, they are them. This isn't unique to MAGA. Every successful mass movement has done some version of this. The difference here is how quickly those cues were turned into an entire direct-to-consumer pipeline. Think about the rallies. They weren't just political events. They were live shows. You had an opening act of warm-up speakers, a crowd working itself up, merch stands, chants rehearsed and repeated, catchphrases dropped in exactly the right spots to trigger applause, and the familiar call and response moments. Each rally created fresh footage, clips that could be sliced, edited, and fed into social media streams. Each gaffe, each insult, each outrageous line became a micro-product that could be shared, remixed, weaponized. Mainstream networks that loathed the movement still aired those clips because they generated clicks and ratings. Outrage is profitable on every side. Meanwhile, email lists were built and refined like any serious e-commerce operation. You sign up once, maybe to get tickets, maybe to show support, maybe just to see what all the fuss is about. Then the messages start. We're being attacked. We're being silenced. We're winning. We're betrayed. Each subject line calibrated to hit an emotion: fear, anger, triumph, betrayal, urgency. Every feeling comes with a button. Donate now. In between election cycles, when older movements would have gone quiet, this one never stopped talking. There was always a new crisis to respond to, a new enemy to mock, a new victory to celebrate, a new product to buy to show you were still part of the story. On social media, whole mini-economies developed around owning the libs or infuriating the MAGA cult, depending on which side you were on. Creators learned quickly. If you attach that four-letter word to your content, praising it, mocking it, dissecting it, you get traffic. Traffic means ad revenue, sponsorships, influence, so they fed the machine day after day. Ask yourself again without flinching. When every emotion you have about this thing, love, hate, fear, exhaustion, can be turned into clicks, and every click can be turned into money, are you still part of a movement? Or are you part of a market segment? There's a woman in Arizona who started noticing the pattern before she had the language for it. At first, she felt the same rush as everyone else in her circle. The rallies, the chants, the sense of empowerment. The first online donation felt like an act of defiance, a way to stick it to the people she believed had written her off. But as the years went on, she noticed that the emails didn't stop, even when there wasn't an election in sight. Every scandal, every investigation, every late-night monologue turned into a fresh campaign of urgency. Sometimes the numbers in her bank account didn't quite justify the red, "Thank you for your donation" screen on her phone. But the guilt was powerful. If she didn't give, was she abandoning the cause? Was she letting them win? One day, scrolling back through months of subject lines, all caps, exclamation points, 12-hour deadlines, she had a thought she almost didn't want to say out loud. Do they see me as a citizen or as a repeat customer? That doesn't automatically mean the movement was fake or that the people at the top never believed in what they were selling. It means that somewhere along the way, two things got braided together so tightly that almost nobody could tell them apart. A genuine sense of grievance and hope at the bottom, and a sophisticated marketing operation at the top, designed to keep attention, loyalty, and cash flowing indefinitely. You can condemn that. You can defend it. Either way, you can't understand MAGA without seeing both layers at once. The human layer, people who felt forgotten, finally hearing their language spoken back to them. The machine layer, emails, merch, rallies, clips, personalities, allied media, all tuned to convert emotion into energy and energy into fuel. The question that haunts the edges of all this is not, are those people stupid? Or, are those leaders evil? The question is much sharper, and it applies to you whether you've ever worn the hat or not. If every major feeling in your political life now has a product, a platform, a personality attached to it, how do you know when you're fighting for something real? And when you've just become very, very valuable data in somebody's marketing dashboard? Because that market doesn't just run on belief. It runs on money. Machines don't sleep. Elections come and go, presidents change, hashtags rise and fall. But once you've built something that feeds on attention, you either keep it burning or you watch it die. MAGA learned very early that the easiest way to keep the fire alive was simple. Never let the story end. Think about the last few years. An investigation is announced. Before you've even finished reading the headline, there's an email in someone's inbox. They're not just coming after me, they're coming after you. There's a donation link. There's a deadline. There's a sense that history turns on whether enough people open their wallets in the next 24 hours. An indictment drops. Cable news goes into fever mode. Clips circulate. Memes flood the timeline. Pundits yell. Within hours, there are new shirts on sale. Witch Hunt. I Stand with Trump. Mugshot Edition. How many times have you watched a crisis turn into a limited edition t-shirt? You might think you're watching justice or corruption or karma play out. Somebody else sees customer segments responding to stimuli. Every outrage, every scandal, every new, "this time it's over" moment gets converted into fuel. The persecution narrative tightens. The us versus them frame hardens. The message is hammered again and again. If they can do this to him, they can do it to you, and the only way to stop them is to prove you're still loyal. Loyalty becomes a currency. You see it in the language. People aren't just disagreeing anymore. They're traitors, sellouts, rhinos. To question the leader from inside the tent is not simply to have a different view. It's to switch sides in the war. What does that do to a movement? It raises the social cost of leaving. If your friends, your family, your church group, your online communities are all invested in the same story, stepping back isn't just changing your mind, it's risking exile. You don't just lose a hat, you lose a home. The man in Ohio feels that more strongly than he'd ever admit. Over the years, he's watched the movement give him things nothing else did. A sense of dignity, a group to belong to, a language for his anger. The local MAGA crowd became his circle. Rallies were his pilgrimages. Social media was where he spent his evenings, surrounded by people who seemed to get it. As the investigations piled up and the headlines got uglier, his instinct wasn't to pull away. It was to double down. They're scared, he tells himself. That's why they're doing this. That's why they want us to quit. So every new accusation, every press conference, every perp walk becomes, to him, proof that he picked the right side. He gives again, even when money is tight. He shares the links, defends the leader at holiday dinners, feels the solidarity tighten each time one more outsider mocks them. The fire that was supposed to purify the movement now keeps it warm. Meanwhile, the woman in Arizona scrolls through her inbox and feels something very different. The subject lines blur into each other. Disaster. Emergency. All hope lost, unless... Each one screams that this, right now, is the final battle. Each one insists that if she doesn't donate, sign, share, the country is finished. She remembers the genuine fear she felt the first time she read one of those messages. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, hand outstretched, being told, "Jump and I'll catch you." Now it just feels like being poked. In the spaces between the alarm bells, she starts to see a pattern. The crises change, the pitch doesn't. Her heartbreak over a country she loves. Somebody turned it into copy. What if, she wonders, the outrage I thought I was fighting has actually been the oxygen keeping this whole thing alive? You don't have to agree with her conclusion, but the question she's asking is bigger than one movement. When every side is constantly telling its followers that the apocalypse is hours away, who benefits? Is it the ordinary people whose nervous systems are being shredded by permanent emergency? Or the ecosystems on all sides that get richer, more powerful, more central every time the dial is turned up? Look at the economy orbiting MAGA now. There are events and conferences, media outlets built almost entirely around this story, influencers whose entire identity and income depend on stoking love or hatred for the movement. There are cottage industries designing merch, doing commentary, running fan channels, selling access, charging for VIP experiences. Again, this isn't unique. Every big modern cause has its own gravitational pull, its own economy. But you have to ask, if the money stopped flowing tomorrow, how many of the loudest voices would still be there purely out of conviction? And if the cameras left, if the clicks dried up, if there were no more ratings to chase, how many enemies would keep performing their outrage with the same intensity? Is this still a bottom-up movement? If so many people at the top are clearly cashing in? That's the claustrophobic part of this story. You can hate MAGA and still be feeding it. Every doom post, every dunk tweet, every "can you believe these people" comment keeps the symbol in circulation, keeps the fight on the front page, keeps the machine humming. You can love MAGA, swear it's the last hope for your country, and still be a customer in someone else's perpetual campaign. So where does that leave you? On one side of this story, real people, real pain, real hopes that latched onto MAGA because nothing else spoke to them with that kind of ferocity. On the other side, logos, funnels, mailing lists, rallies as shows, professional strategists, and donors who know exactly what happens to their influence if the brand ever cools down. Can both exist at the same time? Can something be a genuine movement at the bottom and a calculated machine at the top? That's the ugly, honest question. Maybe the more important one is this: what happens next? Because this doesn't stop when one man leaves the stage. Movements this big never simply evaporate. They evolve. One possible future looks like this. The MAGA label fades slowly from headlines. New slogans rise. New faces appear. People insist the era is over. But the model remains. Every party, every faction, every aspiring leader takes notes on what worked. Make it simple. Make it emotional. Make it wearable. Make it endless. Turn every hit into a product. Never go off camera. Never let the temperature drop. The names change, the colors change, the formula stays. In that future, MAGA is less a movement and more a prototype. Proof of concept that, in a wired world, you can fuse brand and politics so tightly that it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. The other future is stranger. In that one, MAGA stops being tied to a single election or even a single person and becomes a free-floating identity. People call themselves MAGA the way some call themselves punk or goth or evangelical or socialist. It becomes a subculture, a way of seeing the world, a set of media habits, a community, a reflexive distrust of outsiders. Leaders might come and go. They might not live up to the original myth. They might betray expectations, compromise, disappoint. But the brand survives them because it now belongs to the people wearing it, not the man who first sold the hats. In that scenario, arguing over whether MAGA is over misses the point entirely. The important question isn't whether this specific movement wins or loses. It's whether all of us are now stuck in a political landscape where every cause, every campaign, every outrage is built using the same tools. Simplify, brand, monetize, perpetuate. Where does that leave you? If you wear the hat, are you okay being both believer and customer? Maybe you are. Maybe you say, yes, I know there's marketing, I know there's money involved, I know some people are milking this, but the core is still real to me, and I accept that trade. That's your choice. Better to make it consciously than pretend it isn't happening. If you hate the hat, are you willing to admit that every time you share it to mock it, every time you post a clip to rage about it, every time you turn it into a symbol of everything wrong with the world, you might be one more unpaid advertiser for the very story you say you want to kill? That's uncomfortable. But it's honest. The point of all this is not to tell you what to vote, who to love, who to despise. It's to pull back the curtain and show you the engineering behind modern movements, so that the next time something grabs your emotions this hard, you can see the machine as well as the message. Because MAGA is not the last of its kind. There will be other slogans, other hats, other once-in-a-lifetime campaigns that promise to fix everything if you just give a little more money, a little more loyalty, a little more of your nervous system. The only real power you have is how awake you choose to be when that moment comes. If you want more work like this, stories that cut past the tribal screaming and into the wiring of how power, marketing, and history collide, then send a clear signal out there into the noise. Subscribe to Golden History USA. Hit the bell so this kind of long-form analysis doesn't get buried under the next 10-second rage clip. And share this with the one friend you know will argue with it. That argument is where this conversation needs to start, because whether you're inside the movement, outside it, or standing somewhere dazed in the middle, one thing is certain. The age of political brands is here. You can walk through it as a fan, a hater, or something rarer. Someone who sees the whole board and refuses to let any side turn their hope, their fear, or their anger into just another line on a marketing report. Maybe the strangest part of this whole story is realizing it was never just about them. Not just about the guy on stage. Not just about the journalists shouting on TV. Not just about the people in the red hats or the people rolling their eyes at the red hats. It's about you. You've just walked through a whole arc, from 4 words on a cap to the people who built their identity around those words, to the history that made those words so powerful, to the branding and machinery that wrapped around them, to the money, the media, the loyalty tests, the endless grinding permanent campaign. You've met the man in Ohio who feels saved. You've met the woman in Arizona who feels sold. You've seen how they can both be telling the truth at the same time. So now we're at the only question that actually matters. After everything you've just seen, do you still think you're just an observer in all of this? Or can you feel, even a little, how much the machine needs you to keep turning? Your clicks, your outrage, your silence, your donations, your jokes, your shares. Make America Great Again might have started as 4 clever words on a hat, but the real story is what happened inside people when those words connected to something raw. Humiliation, grief, pride, fear, love of country, terror of loss. Those feelings are real. They deserve respect. The problem is that we now live in a world where nothing powerful is allowed to stay just real for very long. The moment a feeling starts to move people, someone tries to package it. Someone slaps it on a cap, in a hashtag, into a fundraising email, into a clip, into a podcast, into a conference, into a donor deck. Someone turns it into a movement. Someone else turns it into a market. And in that chaos, in that constant tug of war between belief and branding, you're supposed to navigate your way through life and still somehow vote, think, and feel like a free human being. How are you supposed to do that if you never see the gears? How are you supposed to protect yourself from being used by any side if nobody ever sits you down and says, look, this is how they built it. This is how it hooked people. This is how it keeps itself alive. This is where your attention and your money actually go. That's what this channel is for. Not to tell you what to believe. Not to sell you the correct hat in a different color. But to give you X-rays of the empires that want to live in your head. If you've stayed all the way to this point, that already says something important about you. You're willing to sit with a story that doesn't flatter your side. You're willing to hold 2 truths in your mind at once. That some people in MAGA are sincere, and some people are making a killing off them. That some critics of MAGA care about democracy, and some critics are just cashing their own clicks. You're willing to admit the possibility that you've been more of a customer, more of an unpaid promoter, than you realized. That is rare. Most people bail long before this moment. They go back to their usual channels, their usual heroes, their usual villains, the places where they're told, you were right all along, it's all their fault. If you don't want to live like that, if you want anyone to keep dragging these uncomfortable stories into the light, then this is where I ask you as clearly as I can. Don't walk away quietly and hope the algorithm figures it out. Tell it. Hit subscribe to Golden History USA. Turn on the notifications so these long-form breakdowns don't get buried under the next 10 seconds of rage. If this made you think, hit like, not because I need a dopamine hit, but because it tells the machine, people want this, not just the cheap stuff. And then do one more thing, maybe the most important one. In the comments, don't just scream based or cringe or cope or cult. Write one sentence about where this left you. Did you see yourself in the man in Ohio? Did you see yourself in the woman in Arizona? Did it make you less certain that your side is pure and the other side is brainwashed? Did it make you more suspicious of anyone who says, we're the movement, they're the machine? Because here's the hinge we almost never talk about. If we keep treating every political story as pure good versus pure evil, we will keep making ourselves delicious targets for the next marketing machine that knows how to speak our language. MAGA will not be the last of its kind. There will be left-wing versions, right-wing versions, religious versions, anti-establishment versions, corporate versions dressed up as activism. The only defense you have is pattern recognition. You've just seen one pattern in detail. If you want to keep training that part of your brain to recognize the next again, the next take back, the next fight with us or die alone pitch, then stay. Stay with this channel. Stay with stories that make you more suspicious of everyone's spin, not just your enemies. Stay with the discomfort of realizing that sometimes the thing that made you feel most alive was also the thing cashing in on you the hardest. And the next time a movement asks for your heart, your money, your vote, your feed, your identity, I hope one small part of your mind whispers, am I joining a cause or onboarding into a brand? If this video helped you even a little bit to hear that whisper more clearly, then don't let it be the last. Subscribe. Share it with the one person in your life who you know will hate it and watch it anyway. Start the argument. Because empires, political, corporate, digital, hate arguments that start with, okay, let's look at how this really works. And that's exactly where we're going, video after video, movement after movement. If you're still here, you've already shown you can handle that. Now the real question is, will you walk back into the storm alone? Or will you bring this lens with you and refuse from this point on to be just another perfectly targeted customer in someone else's revolution?